Hello everybody, this is Gregory with How I Lost Over 100 Pounds and I've kept it off for 30 plus years, where there should be no hesitance with your weight loss and weight maintenance. Today we're going to talk about whether or not you are a good surveillance eater and exactly what does that mean. Now before we begin, if you need help with weight loss, contact me through the Clear ADFM link found here in the episode notes. Also check out my website, Naturopathic Earth, which has hundreds of articles and recipes, my 2 books on weight loss, and if you appreciate my content, there is a link for PayPal. Also check out my podcast, The Awakened Man. So what do I mean by kind of a surveillance eater? I would say that as a whole, people eat better if there's people in their life that eat well, and or people in their life that might know that you maybe don't eat well, you have a binge eating problem or a disordered relationship with food, which most fat people do, and they're aware of that. And so I call this the surveillance eating. So for example, if you live with a spouse, your spouse knows about your history, and they are going to be sensitive to maybe some triggers in the house that would make you eat, or they'll be sensitive to whatever triggers. Doesn't mean they have to be in your house, but maybe emotional triggers or any trigger. And so it helps to have these people in your life because on one level they're surveilling you, but it's not like in an aggressive way that they're surveilling you. It's just easier to have people in your life who know about your history. And this is why I always talk about with eating disorders or your disordered relationship with food, don't hide it. I would tell loved ones about it. So in surveillance eating, for example, you can have a house full of what you would perceive to be junk food or food that you would eat. But you typically don't indulge in this food because maybe you go to work, and at work you pack your lunch, you can control that. And then when you get home, your spouse is there, and your spouse maybe is making the meal, or you're making the meal, and so you eat the meal, and you eat it, a big meal. I recommend fasting until at least lunchtime, and then breaking it with a small, high-fat food, snack, meal, whatever you want to call it. And I talk about this on my episodes on fasting. And then have a relatively big dinner. That way you're not going to get hungry at 10. So let's say in this case your wife cooks the meal and you eat her meal, and that's it. You're under surveillance. She's there, so you're less tempted to eat junk food, and this can work out well. Now some would say, well, but when that person's not around, you're going to eat up all the junk food in the house. Yes, that is a possibility. That means you still have a disordered relationship with food, because a normal person, like I mentioned with the 4-year-old, right? The 4-year-old's only going to eat so they're not hungry. You and the way I used to be certainly weren't like that. We're not like that. We'll eat to excess. We'll eat all the junk food in the house. I talk about in the Confessions of an Obese Child series, I think it was like number 8 when I was a kid, my parents used to lock up all the junk food when I was growing up because my brothers wanted them, but I was going to eat it all. And my addiction was so bad for food that I would break the lock. And eat all the junk food. And my parents really wouldn't even reprimand me for it. They'd be like, oh, Gregory, oh. But they wouldn't even reprimand it. And then I would go work for free at a convenience store in exchange for getting all the free food over there. Just go check out the Confession series if you haven't checked it out, because there's some kind of funny binge eating stories when I was a kid. So this can work, the surveillance eater, because if you have a spouse, your spouse is around a lot of the time, especially during your meals. And so since your spouse is around and they kind of know your triggers, either they might not have junk food around, or I'm not saying they would lock it up, but you're less likely to eat it. Now, of course, the problem with the surveillance eater type phenomenon is A, you might not be married, and B, what happens if your spouse is not around? So if your spouse is not around, let's say you're going home for dinner, but they got to stay late, they got to go to a function with the kids, or they're not going to be around, or even worse, they might be gone for a weekend or whatever. Then, like the old stereotype of like when the woman, the wife, the ball and chain goes out of town, the man's like, yes, and he's happy. He gets all the beer and all the junk food. He's laying out on the couch. Oh, the wife's not here. I'm going to indulge in everything. And look, it can be flipped around too. So this is when there's kind of vulnerability in the surveillance eating, because when the girl's away, the boys will play. And now you're just binge eating all the food. So understandably so, the best thing to do, and I talk about this, is do the deep work. Figure out why you have a disordered relationship with food and fix it. Because you can't always rely on using kind of checks and measures. I talk about in the reflection series, I think maybe it was like episode 24, how after I lost my weight, a good 15 years after I lost my weight, I went through a phase where I had to leave my credit cards at home when I went to work because I would stop and I was going to McDonald's after work and get 3 double cheeseburgers before I got home for dinner. And I would even get to the point when I would hide my credit cards and not put them in my wallet, that I would rummage through the desks of the doctors at where I worked just to get enough change to get maybe a couple bean burritos at Taco Bell for 99 cents. So it's kind of like the same thing here. Like I still had a disordered relationship with food. So if you still have a disordered relationship with food, yes, you can put these checks and balances in, like your spouse knows, your spouse is aware, you always eat your meals with your spouse, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But, you're not really getting to the deeper problem. So I would tell you, of course, get to the deeper problem. Now, until you get to the deeper problem through therapy or whatever it is, having the surveillance kind of system is a good stopgap approach. So if you're one of those guys or girls who's married and you haven't told your spouse that you have these issues, I would probably say that tell them certainly. And then you guys can come up with a system that works for her and for you, whether it be like maybe she likes junk food, and so maybe she'll hide the food. I mean, I don't really recommend that. But chances are your spouse is probably overweight because 70% of Americans are overweight. But the point is that there is a system that can be worked out until you can really do the deep work and purge yourself, exercise yourself of these binge eating demons. But until then, have your meals with your sibling or with your spouse or whoever, with your family. Go out of your way to do that. And if it needs to be checks and balances, like you don't take your credit card with you when you go out to eat, or there's no Uber Eats or anything set up on your phone, or with porn addicts, they'll put in the filters. Whatever it takes as the stopgap. If it works, it works. Your weight loss journey, weight maintenance journey is one day at a time, like with every addiction. It's one day at a time. So whatever gets you through the day, but ultimately you're going to need to do the deep work to purge yourself of this forever. Guys, post in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Hit the notification, subscribe, and share button. Until next time, take care, God bless, and pray.